brush with death can happen to people when they least expect it.
I feel that I was very unlucky to be in two big disasters, but incredibly lucky to survive both.
It's just sort of like, okay, I'm hitting power lines, gotta grab onto something before I fall.
If I hadn't been singing, people would have been leaving the pub and maybe I'd been leaving myself, and you just don't know what could have happened. It could have been a lot worse.
Every year, countless people escape death under the most extraordinary of circumstances. But they're the lucky ones. They live to tell the tale. In 1982, during the Falklands War, I was on board the troop ship Sir Galahad when it was hit by an Argentinian missile. "48 of my fellow Welsh guardsmen were killed and another 97 were injured. I was lucky to survive. 40% of my body suffered severe burns. After years of hospital treatment and skin grafts, I've come through this deeply traumatic experience a changed person." Whenever we see news footage of disasters, our attention and sympathy is focused upon the people who died in these tragic events and the families who left behind. The impact on the survivors is often overlooked. For one British civil servant, Gary Fellows, the 30th of April 1999 was only the beginning of an ordeal that was to turn his life upside down. Gary was a regular patron at the Admiral Duncan pub in Soho, the heart of London's gay quarter.
I was working in Whitehall at the time, and I must have finished about 5 o'clock. I probably got to the Duncan about 6 o'clock-ish, and it was the first real warm, sunny evening of that year. And everyone was outside pavement cafes, drinking coffee and enjoying the sunshine. So the pub itself was probably a little quieter than normal. There was probably about 20, 30 people in the pub when I first arrived. I bought a bottle of Budweiser and stood at the back of the pub, sort of leaning against the jukebox, which tends to be pretty much my normal bolt hole in the place. One by one, all my friends started arriving, and one of my mates introduced me to a friend of his. And I was about to go and get another drink, but I thought, well, no, I better hang on and chat to this guy. It'd be rude to just leave him. Well, that, unbeknown to me at the time, probably saved my life, because while I was chatting to him, the bomb actually exploded. There was a big blue flash, and everyone kind of ducked a little, and I can remember the sound of flying metal hitting the ceiling. And I didn't really hear an explosion, just a big blue flash. And the next thing I knew, it was pitch black, thick sulphur smoke everywhere, and it was deadly silent. That's one thing that will never leave me, is the fact that you've got all these different sounds. You've got people chatting, you've got people moving around, the jukebox playing, and it all stops in a millionth of a second, all at the same time. I couldn't see where the street was. It was just pitch black and I couldn't see which direction to move in, so I just stood there and remember thinking, the smoke's probably going to kill me. Because you hear that often people die not through flames, but through smoke inhalation. And I'm asthmatic as well. So I was thinking, I'm probably not going to make it out of here. And I just might not see my parents again. The next thing I remember was instinct told me to get out. So I ended up on the pavement outside.
Although Gary got out without any broken bones, many others were severely injured.
I checked even before I got out of the pub. I looked down to see if I still had 2 arms and 2 legs. A crowd had gathered in front of the Duncan, As I staggered out, I can remember seeing them. And at that point, the police were clearing the cafes, the bars, the pubs, the shops, just screaming at everyone to get out. My injuries were very slight. I was very, very lucky. I had cuts and bruises, badly bruised right foot, and a piece of shrapnel sticking out of my left shoe.
3 people died and 4 needed amputations. 26 suffered very serious burns and another 53 were injured by flying glass and nails. Gary's regular spot in the pub undoubtedly saved his life.
I thank God I was like standing where I was, really. When they reopened the pub, I noticed they'd put it back just about as it used to be, and I still lean against the jukebox. So creature of habit, I suppose.
The very next day, police arrested a 24-year-old man who admitted holding a grudge against the gay community. David Copeland was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment.
After the trial, I felt that that's kind of a form of closure and we can really start to move on now. And I pretty much did. I started thinking about it an awful lot less after that.
Remarkably, Gary Fellows escaped almost unhurt from the Admiral Duncan bombing. But by a bizarre twist of fate, he was to face yet another more harrowing experience.
I could see the carriage up ahead turning over, knowing that we would be next.
In April of '99, a bomb destroyed the Admiral Duncan pub in Soho, killing 3 and injuring another 70. Gary Fellows was incredibly lucky to escape almost unhurt. But a year and a half later, on the 17th of October 2000, he boarded a train at London's King's Cross to Peterborough to pay his father a surprise visit. Just 30 minutes later, his train was to pass through Hatfield station.
A few minutes after pulling out of London, the ticket collector came along. And I said, "Is the buffet open yet?" And he said, "Yeah, it should be." So I thought, I'll go and get a cup of tea. So I was walking through the train and carried on into the buffet car. And at that moment, there was a loud bang underneath the train and started shaking about violently. And I thought straight away, we've come off the rails. It started filling up immediately with a very thick dust from the ballast in between the rails. And the actual dust in the carriage reminded me of the smoke in the Duncan. And I can remember thinking, oh, not again.
The buffet car continued moving despite the wheels coming off the rail.
I could see the carriage up ahead turning over, knowing that we would be next.
As the carriage began to turn over, Gary grabbed the nearest handrail.
If I hadn't managed to get my hand around the rail, I would have been killed. It would have just minced me up.
It was only when the train ground to a halt that Gary realised he hadn't escaped serious injury this time.
I looked down and my Timberland boot was swinging loose. And I thought, I've bust my leg, I think the bone's come through, and my foot may be about to drop off. And I was really surprised. My first reaction to that was, well, if the people that lost limbs in the Duncan can carry on, then so can I.
He was also trapped under debris. He couldn't move. All he could do was wait for help.
Gary, how are you going?
Paul Bromwich and his crew from the St Albans fire station was one of the first to be called out to the disaster. The rescue team arrived at the scene within 15 minutes.
We went through round checking for casualties and so forth, and looked along into the buffet car, and right at the very end in the lobby where the 2 carriages join, there was Gary with another fireman who'd got there just moments before, and a paramedic. So I climbed through to assist.
The rescue began despite the scene still being unstable.
I can remember thinking, we've got to get out. We don't know what's going to happen. Have all the trains been stopped? Are we going to get hit by another train? Is there going to be a fire?
There was a danger of fire, being the buffet carriage, but the crew had already seen to that.
But Gary's injuries made it difficult for the firemen to remove him quickly from the carriage.
He had severe shock, and he had quite a severe lower leg injury, which had to be immobilised. We then manipulated him onto the immobilising stretcher and slid him out through the length of the carriage to the open end and to trackside, then to the ambulance, which was a good 3/4 of a mile away. It was quite a way to carry him.
As we neared the ambulance, one of the firemen said to me, "Oh, there'll be some tasty nurses at the hospital, mate." And I said, "Well, I'm quite happy with the company I'm in, thanks a lot."
We joked with him when we'd found out that he'd been in the pub bombing and also this. I asked him if he wouldn't mind doing my lottery numbers for me.
Gary was lucky to survive as the 4 passengers who tragically lost their lives were in the buffet car with him. Ironically, after surviving a nail bomb blast, his broken ankle was fixed with a surgical pin. In total, he spent 3 weeks in hospital recovering from the physical injuries he received in the crash. After the Hatfield disaster, Gary Fellows sought the help of a counsellor. Post-traumatic stress can live with disaster victims long after the physical injuries have healed.
I feel that I was very unlucky to be in 2 big disasters, but incredibly lucky to survive both. I'm still here at the end of the day, and there are people that aren't. I never forget them.
Gary couldn't have expected to have been in 2 disasters in his normal life. Skydiving is certainly not an everyday activity. The sport could be seen to be courting danger, while others view it as a thrilling but safe pursuit.
When you first start skydiving, it's almost like the feeling you have like when you're in a car accident. Your heart's pumping just faster than you can ever imagine. You know, it's almost hard to see. It's, you know, you can't walk. It's just so much energy, just overwhelming, just sensory overload.
29-year-old American Peter Conrad is an experienced skydiver and instructor from Denver, Colorado. He's made some 200 jumps, but none of these could have prepared him for the events that were to unfold on the 15th of June 2002. Skydiving is a safe sport if all the right precautions are taken. Peter had been through this careful routine many times.
Yeah, it's just my 227th skydive. It was no big deal. It was just another time that I was jumping with my friends.
But on that day, the conditions were not entirely normal. Bushfires were raging in the local area, and World War II slurry bombers were called in to dump tons of water on the flames.
Every time you turned on the TV, it was something about another fire spread or another fire was contained.
But as the fires were many miles away from their jump zone, the skydivers' preparations went ahead.
It was absolutely standard. It was got ready, got in the plane. It's just another day with my friends.
We were looking forward to it, just like every other jump. Knew we were going to go out and have a good time.
My friend and I, we exited the plane, about 12,000 feet over the ground. It's incredibly noisy. You're falling at the ground, so there's some things to be concerned about.
As usual, they filmed their jumps with cameras strapped to their helmets.
We ended up getting a little separated towards the middle of the skydive, got some distance, some horizontal separation between us.
My friend and I, kind of broke off a little earlier, and I was just kind of watching my little wrist altimeter that told me how high it was.
Meanwhile, a slurry bomber pilot was returning from the fire zone to collect more water. He took the most direct route.
I was just about at 3,000 feet, just, reaching to pull, and I heard a plane fly under me.
Straight into their jump zone.
Almost instinctively, I had to lift up my feet to miss the plane. It's not something that you prepare for or can even imagine, so just my instinctive response was, I just, looked off to the left. And then to see a, huge 4-engine bomber flying away from you that you just missed by, 10 or 15 feet, it definitely opens your eyes.
The 15-ton bomber was so close that if Peter had jumped a split second earlier, he would have been directly in the aircraft's path. Reeling from his near miss, he then almost forgot the most important procedure.
I was still on my belly and still falling at 120 miles to the earth. My brain is processing this information about what just happened, and I was still falling at the ground, and it took about 3 seconds to realize that I still have to do something about this. I still have to open my parachute. So ended up landing. I just remember yelling just some words. people on the ground saw it, they just couldn't believe that I missed it.
The footage from the camcorder strapped to Peter's helmet confirmed how close he came to the slurry bomber.
When we watched the video, I don't think anyone realized exactly how close I was. Yeah, when I saw in each frame the wing getting closer and closer. Everyone that watched it, they agreed that it was about 10 to 15 feet away.
Peter was lucky. Skydiving claims 61 lives every year. Surprisingly, most of these are due to human error rather than parachutes failing to open. Despite his near miss, Peter continues to skydive, but he will never forget the jump that could have been his last.
Yeah, it just makes you realize how delicate life is. It doesn't take more than 0.03 seconds of separation between life and death. I can't imagine that in the future I'll ever come closer to dying and get away from it.
Australia is a tourist mecca for around about 500,000 young backpackers every year. Keith O'Brien from Wigan had given up his job to go and explore the vast wildernesses of the outback. Like thousands before him, he stayed in one of those basic hostels that populate small rural communities. It was a hostel that was to make headlines around the world. After seeing the big Australian cities like Sydney and Melbourne, the 21-year-old realised that he had spent nearly all his money.
Desperately needed work by this stage. Funds were very low, very, very low. Didn't particularly want to ring up home at this stage either. Thought I was going to do it on my own. So ended up just going to Childers.
This heritage town in North Queensland is a regular stop-off for cash-strapped backpackers. Here they can fund their travels fruit picking.
It was just something different to do. I'm never going to do it ever again. As soon as I got there was work for me the next day, which I was quite happy with.
As Keith needed cheap accommodation, he chose the Palace Backpackers Hostel as his temporary home. He soon formed a close bond with fellow travellers.
Everyone sort of just binded, because we was all in the same boat, So we just sort of made light of it, had a laugh as we did it. It was superb. We'd come back in from work and it'd be rushed for the showers. We'd all eat tea together, we'd all cook together, we all lived, we all drank together. We were like one big family.
However, one hostel resident was different from the rest. 37-year-old Robert Long was not a traveller. He was the local drifter and misfit.
Robert Long, as a person, was very strange. He had a room, he had a bed. He tended to sleep on a couch in the lounge. He was a bully to some degree. He didn't particularly like backpackers.
Keith had been there for 6 weeks and was planning to leave on his 22nd birthday.
My birthday present is I'm going to get myself out of Childers, I'm going to go back to Sydney, I'm going to start working again where my friends were. A few days extra work come up, so I thought, well, a little bit extra money in my pocket won't do any harm. And ended up staying a little bit longer.
The hostel decided to hold a birthday party in his honour. The young backpackers revelled late into the night.
We were still celebrating my birthday, which was only the day before, because we had so much left over. It was brilliant. Gradually everyone flaked off one by one, went to the rooms here up early for work, and that was it. That was the last thing I remember, is just hitting the sack.
Australian police have removed the last 2 bodies from the hostel where 15 backpackers perished in a fire. The man suspected of starting the blaze has been spotted in the area. Louisa Baldini reports.
Robert Long, a 37-year-old loner, was seen near a fire in a rubbish bin in the hostel just hours before it went up in flames.
Keith's misgivings about Robert Long were justified. Just after midnight, the loner deliberately started a fire in the downstairs TV room. Within 15 minutes, the fire engulfed the 100-year-old timber building. Upstairs, Keith was in a shared room with a fellow British backpacker.
There was a lot of commotion, smashing of windows, people screaming, people banging on doors. And then it sort of dawned on me. I looked around and you see a bit of smoke coming under the door. Just realised the severity of this was huge. I woke my roommate up, Kelly, shook, come on Kelly, hostel's on fire, we have to get out.
The fire spread quickly to the first floor, blocking the only escape routes.
There were bars on the windows, vertical, horizontal, gaps in them, not big, maybe 1.5 foot by 1 foot, not big at all. So, because I'd originally seen the flames at the other end of the building, I thought we'd be okay. I thought we'll just walk around a few corners and we'll be out. But as soon as we walked out of that room, you couldn't see your hand touching your face.
Unfortunately for the residents, the smoke alarms hadn't activated.
We had to go sort of towards the fire to get out. Panic sets in. And I thought, we'll have to go through the windows now in the room, we'll have to go back in the room, we'll be safer that way now. We managed to get back into the bedroom to go through the window. Obviously I didn't think it was the safest option because they'd gone that way the first time, but we didn't have much choice. If I couldn't get out, at least Kelly could get out. Kelly's very petite woman, very. As I put through the window, some people outside hauled her through.
Now Keith was faced with a terrible realisation. He might not be able to get through the bars himself.
I'm not the smallest of people. I managed to get my head through and a shoulder and got pulled through. The gap's 1.5 foot by 1 foot. Not very big at all. Not very big at all. How I got through, I'll never know.
A few minutes more and he could have perished.
And we all congregated on the front of the hostel, and it was a sight that I'll never forget. I mean, I think about it every single day. What people don't really understand is that you're looking for these people. You know, it's like a second family. You're looking for people and you can't see them.
15 of the 84 young backpackers suffered terrible deaths. Tragically, bodies were found slumped in piles under the barred windows.
A lot of people have paid dearly, 15 people, but it's not just those 15 people that have paid, it's their families, their friends, the families of the friends, their aunties, their uncles, us, my friends, my family. They've all felt it, they've seen us. You know, that shouldn't have had to happen.
Robert Long is now serving 20 years for arson and murder. This is little consolation to those left grieving. Keith returned to Childers a year later for a memorial service. Being reminded of the details of the fire brought home how lucky he was to escape.
I've been told by firefighters after the fire that I should be clinically dead, the amount of time that we spent in the smoke. So, whatever you believe, so somebody was looking after me that night. It's always going to be with me. It doesn't go away, you just learn how to deal with it. 15 young people down, such a waste of life, people who didn't deserve to die. You know, they were prime life, they were living life to the full, and that's why we've got to live it to the full now.
There's no doubt fire is a terrifying and unpredictable hazard, but the weather too can sometimes be just as life-threatening.
We knew there was going to be bad weather because we'd seen it on the reports, you know, but nothing like what materialised.
With over 19 million flights a year worldwide, there are on average just 10 passenger airline crashes. Despite this statistically making air travel the safest form of transport, many of us have a misplaced fear of flying. However, for one British couple, their anxiety turned into a nasty reality on a short flight to Europe. In September of 1999, newlyweds Bill and Trixie Tams were looking forward to holidaying in Spain. Although they were not experienced travellers, the flight was a short one.
It was 3 years ago, last September, and wife and I thought it'd be a good idea to incorporate a holiday with visiting friends.
Well, Billy wanted to go to see his friends because they've got bars in Spain. He wanted to go and visit them over there.
Even so, Trixie had her reservations about flying.
The day before we were going to leave, I just really didn't want to go. I felt like a bit sort of, not apprehensive, what's the word? I don't know, it's a bit of a strange feeling, you know, sort of depressed.
Overcoming her anxiety, she boarded the plane with her husband at Cardiff Airport.
We got onto the plane, everything was normal, we took off, we're flying over there. We knew there was going to be bad weather because we'd seen it on the reports, you know, but nothing like what materialised.
They tried to relax and enjoy their flight, but an hour later they hit bad weather.
We started to hit some bad turbulence, you know, we just thought, oh, it's a storm. But But Trix was a bit worried about it because you could see lightning outside and, you know, you don't normally see that sort of thing.
I remember the lightning as we were approaching Spain, and I was thinking, oh my goodness me, you know, and then we had a lot of turbulence, and I was thinking, oh my.
Bill tried to keep Trixie calm, but she became increasingly nervous as the turbulence buffeted the plane.
And I was actually gripping onto the seat, and I said to Bill, we're going to crash. We're going to crash. And he said, no, we're going to be on, you know, jovial person he is. And, you know, he said, no, it's going to be... I said, I'm telling you, this plane is going to crash.
And she kept saying, I don't like this, I don't like this. I kept saying, we're all right, kid, don't worry, you know, having a bit of a laugh about it, you know.
Despite Bill's lightheartedness, the situation took a turn for the worse. The plane flew into a torrential rainstorm just outside Girona Airport.
And then the pilot told us to fasten our seatbelts, so on and so forth, and that's the last thing he said to us.
The pilot gave up an attempt to land the plane the first time, as the winds were too strong.
I don't think that we can fault that pilot, because he did literally do everything according to the rule book. The only trouble was things within seconds changed.
On the second attempt, he was blinded by a bank of cloud.
This took him by surprise, and it might have taken any pilot by surprise, however experienced.
The pilot decided to attempt the landing anyway, despite being buffeted around.
It went down like to about 5,000 feet, it was shown on the monitor, and then it went down to 2,000 feet. I think, oh, you know, we're going to be landing soon, but it's very rocky it was. And all of a sudden the plane started to go up again. And this happened a couple of times, this. 5,000, 2,000, 5,000, 2,000.
It had a very heavy landing, bounced on its main wheels, and then came down very, very violently on its nose wheel.
But it was a strange quietness, you know. It wasn't hardly any panic there. It went dark, and it sort of took off a bit again, and it sort of landed with one great big thud.
There would have been a terrific noise because the aircraft was scraping along the runway on its nose.
And I said to my husband, this is it, we're going to die. And, excuse me.
All of a sudden, the aircraft then veers off the runway onto rough ground.
I grabbed Trix because she was holding onto the front of the headrest in front of her. Got my arm around her and was shaking about.
It hits a large bank and bounces over the top of it. It bounced so high that it actually almost got airborne again.
It seemed to be taking like for hours, but even though it was only like minutes.
It hit the ground again very hard and then went down a bank.
And then we just heard this crack.
And it was at that point the aircraft broke into 3 pieces.
It split into 3 pieces. The front half, there was a middle section and a rear part. The rear part that we were in had tilted like we were like that.
Although the plane had come to a rest a few hundred metres from the runway, the drama was far from over.
We could smell this aviation fluid, and I was panicking then. Any minute now it's going to blow up. You know, Trix saying, we've got to get off, get it off.
With no sign of help from the emergency services, the passengers decided to take action and escape the potential death trap.
As I jumped out, we just landed in this mud. It was just like soft, wet mud.
And I landed actually on this boggy field up to my knees in mud. And then I fell actually flat on my stomach, and he sort of dragged me along the field.
I started to piggyback Trix because this mud was knee deep in this field. I was like, trying to wade out of it with her on my back, but it was too much for me. So in the end I had to drag her across the mud as far away as I could.
It was a surreal situation because it's like you're in a dream. It's not really happening, you know, and it was so scary. And all I could see was all these people, loads and loads of people trying to get away from this aircraft.
The passengers ran in fear, not knowing if the fuel tanks were about to explode.
In the back of my mind, this plane's going to go up. You know, we would have been fried alive because we're only 100 yards from it.
It was a terrifying situation to be in, terrifying.
Despite taking Trixie a safe distance from the aircraft, Bill returned to help other people struggling to get off the plane. By now, the rain was helping to dampen down the wreckage.
My husband went back to the plane to help people get off the plane, which scared me because I thought the plane was going to blow up.
I said, just stay here and I'll come back to you. Don't go anywhere.
And I couldn't wait for him to come back because I just so worried about him.
It's quite romantic because I'm shouting out, Trixie, Trixie, and there's all this rain coming down.
I was calling his name to find amongst all these people.
I could hear, Billy, Billy, and they imagine there's 240 to 300 people there and we're trying to find each other. And
I couldn't find him. Eventually he did come back and I was relieved about that.
Remarkably, due to a power failure, the control tower was unaware that the plane was lying only a few hundred yards from the runway.
We're all stood there, what's happening? You know, there's no ambulances, there's no fire brigade. We're expecting the helicopter to come over, searching for us. It took them an hour and 3/4 to get to us.
Despite the fuselage having snapped in 3 places, everyone survived the devastation. All 245 passengers on board escaped without any broken bones. They were all put up in a hotel to recover, but the trauma of the near miss affected Bill and Trixie profoundly.
I thought I was going to die. I thought I was gone, and I couldn't understand then afterwards. Why didn't I? And I felt guilty in a strange way that I didn't die.
I was trying to be strong for Trix for the first 3 or 4 days, and one day I flipped. I just got up and I cleared off to Barcelona for the day. I got up at 5 in the morning, just cleared off, and she didn't know where I'd gone.
This prompted Bill to seek help from a counsellor provided by Britannia Airlines.
He tried to tell me you haven't got to think if this and if that, you know, just think you're here now, you know, don't think, oh, if the plane had caught fire, if we hadn't got out of it, you know, if it had done this, if it had done that.
Even in this day and age when safety is integral to plane design, 100% survival rate after a crash like this is exceptional.
Whatever goes wrong cannot go as wrong as what happened on that day. I always think, well, you was wiped out that day and you had a second chance.
We did live, you know, and we're very lucky to have a second chance. And so you have to make the best of everything you've got now, every minute of it.
Few of us give second thought to driving every day. Many of us feel safer in this environment than we do in trains or in the air. But driving is the most hazardous form of transport. In 2001, road accidents were responsible for causing nearly 38,000 casualties and over 3,000 deaths in the UK. In the US, where the car is considered a necessity rather than a luxury, there are 110 fatal accidents every day. In January of 2003 in Blue Springs, Missouri, USA, a simple car crash triggered one of the strangest events the town had ever witnessed.
There's nothing to really compare a car like that to. I've seen cars in the trees, I've seen cars sideways on trees. I've never seen an occupant actually thrown out and up into the power lines, and we're talking 30 to 40 feet off the ground. Any way you look at it, you just don't see that.
18-year-old Joe Thompson, your average American teenager, was on his way back from his aunt's house in his Jeep.
I was headed home, and there was a guy next to me, and he cut me off. When he cut me off, I swerved to miss him, and he hit the back into my car. My car spun and started rolling.
Now on to an amazing story of survival. An 18-year-old Blue Springs man gets ejected from his Jeep and lands on some power lines.
I hear this big loud crash, and I see this guy flying through the air. I'm like, what the heck just happened?
The first roll tore off the top of the Jeep, and somewhere between the first and the fifth roll, I was catapulted out of the Jeep, 35 feet in the air.
This guy's grabbing on every wire he can, trying to hold on.
As Joe was flung out of his car, remarkably, he grabbed hold of the power lines above him.
I didn't see him, and he clipped the front end of my vehicle, and I heard a loud crash, and I looked up, and I saw his Jeep tumbling.
The first thing that happened was the guy jumped out of his car looking around for me, and he's like, well, where are you at?
And I heard him say, turn the car off, and I couldn't see anybody. And I said, where are you? And he said, look up, and I looked up, and he was hanging from the power lines.
And then just stood there dumbfounded, just looking at me like...
Returning to the scene, Joe recalls the moment it happened.
My Jeep was sitting right there. I was thrown up above those wires, hit one of the top wires, fell through onto the middle wire. The power line on the bottom was wrapped around my leg and wrapped around the line at the same time.
Gradually, a crowd gathered to stare at this astounding spectacle.
One of the ladies looked up and told me, well, I called 911, the emergency crew's coming. I just looked down at her and said, what good are cop cars gonna do me? Give me a fire truck.
Firefighters David Doherty and Brian Moody were about to witness an event unique in their careers.
We were dispatched on an emergency medical call, a motor vehicle accident, and we were ready for everything because we were thinking the worst before we got there.
Well, at first we didn't really know that the gentleman himself was in the power lines. We thought the vehicle was in the power lines. You get calls like that from time to time.
We started rolling up and we saw a person in the power lines, and he was moving, and it just kind of hit us in awe. I'd never seen anything like that before in my 13 years.
A combination of luck and survival instincts had left Joe alive, but in imminent danger. Thousands of volts were pulsing through the electrical wires he was holding on to.
It was just sort of like, okay, I'm hitting power lines, gotta grab onto something before I fall. Because if you fall, it's gonna hurt.
Initially, the firefighters were unable to help in case they earthed the power cables.
There are 4 power lines up there. 3 of them were at 7,200 volts. What are you gonna think? The guy's in real trouble.
Since they were dealing with electricity, they didn't want to get too close because the electricity could arc from the power lines onto the ladder and kill everyone on the truck.
We're just telling him to hang on, that we were trying to get the power company there, make sure the lines weren't charged.
I was worried about, obviously, him being up there and hanging like he was hanging. I didn't know how long he could hang that way.
And that's why we set the ladder truck up underneath Joe, just in case he did fall. He wouldn't fall the full 25 feet.
On the inside, I was thinking, oh man, what if I fall? But there's no reason for me to panic because God was in control of the situation. I just turned to God in that situation. There's nowhere else to turn. While I'm hanging on the power line, the only place I can look is up. And so that's what I did. I looked up.
Again, his life was in his own hands.
Whenever the fireman asked me how long I could hang on for, I told him I can hang on as long as it takes. And he just sort of chuckled at that. But I was getting tired.
He did want to get down, and he lost feeling down in his waist, and I think that was primarily from just hanging up there.
The power line was going through the inside of my elbows, and so it was cutting off the circulation to my arms. I was starting to get pins and needles. Except for the pins and needles, they felt like daggers. For about a millisecond, it crossed my mind to let go. And then the realization popped into my head that there's no way. There's no way. If I let go, I'm toast. I'm gonna be flatter than a pancake when I hit that ground.
After 20 minutes, the power was turned off. The firemen finally rescued Joe.
3 of us got up there, put a cervical collar to stabilize his neck, got the wire wrapped out around his foot.
We had to spin him in the wires in order to get him down to untangle his legs, so we turned him over about 3 times in the wires to get the 2 wires parted, and get his leg out from in between them.
And we secured him to the long spine board and carried him down the ladder. It was a different rescue.
I came down, they're like, do you know how long you were up there? I said, I guess 8 minutes. And they said, no, you're up there about 20 minutes. And when they told me that, I was just like dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. There were no words to describe it. I was just like in awe.
He was pretty calm considering what he'd just been through. It was amazing to look at his vehicle that he was in, that he didn't get injured down there before he ever even got up into the power lines. To get through that part was a pretty amazing thing because it really destroyed his vehicle. He was just glad to be alive, and he stated that several times.
Such was the seriousness of the crash, Joe was airlifted to hospital. Television news of his predicament had already reached his local pastor, who set off to hospital expecting the worst.
We raced off towards the hospital, obviously couldn't imagine what it is we were going to find, just hoped he was alive.
His fears were unfounded. Joe Bailey had a scratch on him.
Throughout the entire time of the hospital, probably 3 doctors came in. First one came in, checked me out, walked out shaking his head. Couldn't believe it. Because what the doctors were seeing was a kid that just got out of a totally traumatizing accident with a few bumps, a few bruises.
You could see that they had slashed his jeans in order to tend to his terrible wounds, and to their amazement had found nothing and released him. And this was just a miracle that's conspicuous to the point of being comical.
The odds against Joe surviving unhurt were astonishing.
From the beginning of the accident to the end of the accident, there were so many injuries that he could have sustained. If you were looking at an emergency medical textbook, he could have probably made it through every chapter. Joe was very lucky.
There's no such thing as luck. The entire thing is miraculous. I'm just glad to be alive, so really don't dwell on the past, on what could have happened, because it didn't.
Sometimes, being in the wrong place at the wrong time can change the course of our lives forever. Terrorism by its nature is indiscriminate, and it can strike at ordinary people in everyday situations.
You don't actually think that it's going to happen to you, or where you're drinking, or where you're working.
In this post-September the 11th world, the chances of being involved in a terrorist incident have increased. For the British public, living with terrorism has been a reality for the past 20 years. Like many suburban areas of London, Ealing Broadway has a thriving high street with restaurants, late-night bars and pubs. On the 2nd of August 2001, the popular Townhouse pub was holding a special karaoke competition. "21-year-old law student Danielle Nelson went along especially to take part.
My mum actually heard about it. Somebody had said to her that there was a film crew going to the Townhouse and they were filming the karaoke in there. So me and my friends and my mum went down there for the evening and had a really good time.
There was lots of people that had come in, lots of friends. It was very, very exciting. You know, lots of people wanted to get in front of the camera and do their stuff on the karaoke.
Although the Townhouse had an extended licence, the security team was strict about enforcing its midnight curfew.
I knew it was late and I knew it was getting to closing time.
I was getting pressure from the bouncers to actually end the evening as soon as possible. They like normally to end slightly before or on the dot on midnight. Danielle was one of them people that when she sings, everyone listens to her. So as it was a special occasion, I had a word with the bouncers and said, listen, we've got a girl here who's really good. So that was the reason that we kept going a couple of minutes after midnight.
Come on, sing along.
While the singing continued, outside on the street no one noticed a grey Saab that had been parked on double yellow lines, not far from the pub's entrance. Over 100 people gathered around to hear Danielle singing one last song. It was now a minute or so past midnight.
As I was singing, I think I got about 3 or 4 lines into the song.
We suddenly heard a big bang. Danielle immediately looked towards the window.
I saw the light from the explosion and then I heard it. I don't think I realised what was going on and just thought to myself, well, the show must go on, and tried to carry on singing.
The grey Saab contained an IRA bomb which had been detonated to devastating effect.
You felt the pub shake and the windows came in. And although it was only for a couple of seconds or maybe just a split second, you did feel the vibrations and the earth literally did move.
It seemed like a kind of cinema screen because you had the windows, and just as you would watch kind of DVD surround sound movie, you kind of saw these flames all coming directly towards you, very, very lifelike. And it was quite a scary experience. I don't think I'll ever forget that.
The whole pub, after a few seconds of being in awe of what was happening, realised, and that's when the panic broke out. The next thing that I remember is someone saying on the mic that everybody to stay in and get away from the windows.
I thought, okay, I've got the microphone. It's really up to me to kind of tell people how to deal with this.
Okay, once again, can you please step away from the window? Away from the window!
The supervisors then opened up a fire exit that was a little further up towards Ealing Broadway tube station, and we started to kind of guide people out that entrance.
Okay, can you please start following the gentleman signalling over here, please?
Scenes of chaos and panic greeted the pub goers.
Everybody just started leaving through the fire exit. think they just wanted to get out of the building. People were running in all directions. They were running towards it, away from it.
Remarkably, only 7 people were admitted to Ealing Hospital. No one was killed. The bomb detonated after most of the revellers from the other bars had dispersed, except for the townhouse. If it weren't for the last song, the pub would have been closed on time and hundreds of people would have been on the street, within metres of the car that was packed with 40 kilograms of explosives.
Now I look back on that and see how serious it was. It really makes me kind of appreciate the fact that we did get out of that one alive. And I think it'll always stay with me for the rest of my life.
You just don't realise how lucky you are sometimes and how close you can come to being hurt, especially the size of the bomb. And they knew that it was there for a reason, that it was intended to kill people and maim people.
Surviving the horrific trauma itself is only the beginning of a much longer process. For me, it was a physical as well as a mental rehabilitation. For others, it is like being given a second chance.
You've got a second chance with your life, so do something about it.
Every day after that was just a bonus day.
But the sooner you realise that you're a survivor and not a victim, the sooner you'll be able to put the traumatic experience behind you.
Since the beginning of time, humans have risked life and limb to push back the boundaries of exploration.
Walk outside and look at an 8-level building, and that's how big the waves were. They were about 80 feet high.
If you're doing an expedition by yourself in the Arctic Ocean and you have frostbitten fingers and you try to continue, you'll end up dead.
Some doctors said to my face that I would never walk again and that I would never talk again.
Adventure and exploration is naturally fraught with risk and danger. But for many, it is simply the challenge that attracts them in the first place. As a relative of Scott of the Antarctic, I always admired the intrepid pioneers who pushed back the boundaries of adventure and exploration. And since 1985, I've been fortunate to be involved in a number of world record-breaking attempts of my own. The most dangerous was an attempt to cross the Atlantic Ocean in a hot air balloon in 1987, accompanied by balloon designer Per Lindstrand. My aim was to emulate Charles Lindbergh, who was the first to cross the Atlantic in an aeroplane 76 years ago.
We arranged a meeting in London and we met, and within half an hour we had agreed to make the attempt the next summer.
50 more yards to go!
Rich had always been very much into breaking records and pushing the limits.
Challenger, the Bishop Rock Lighthouse. Congratulations.
We weren't the first to attempt crossing the Atlantic by balloon. Earlier flights ended in disaster.
The previous attempts were rather risky affairs. They were done with low budgets. A lot of them hadn't even flown the gas balloon before. They took great risks, and some of them paid the ultimate price. A record attempt of this caliber can never be totally safe. You can make it safer, but you're never totally safe.
In our attempt to break the world record, we had to go back to the drawing board.
The transatlantic balloon was quite unique. It was the biggest balloon by a wide margin ever made. It had a unique skin, it had solar absorbent qualities. And of course, you can't test fly something like that, but you're likely to destroy the envelope in the first landing. So you're taking a big risk when you're doing it.
We understand the launch of the Virgin Atlantic Flyer, the hot air balloon, looks like it's a definite situation coming up, so stay tuned to the Rock of Maine.
Dawn, July the 2nd, 1987. We launched from the Carabasset Valley on the eastern coast of the United States. But as we take off, we encountered our first problem. We lost the fuel tank.
No one expects to lose a propane tank on takeoff, but we had 6 tanks, and I reckon we could have crossed the Atlantic on half the fuel we had, so we had a good margin.
Temperature inside the capsule is about 65 degrees. Now outside, we understand it is some 40 degrees below zero. They are just rocking their way across the ocean.
I don't know whether you're picking me up down there, but I wish you could all be up here enjoying it with us, because beginning of a great adventure. We had successfully climbed to our cruising altitude of 27,000 feet. It was only then that it really hit home. The capsule would be our life support for the next 48 hours.
The transatlantic capsule was fairly cramped. There was just space for 2 people, no space to sleep. Quite convenient with the control, easy to operate all the valves and so on. But we only expected it there for 2 days, so for 2 days you can live with it.
Our first challenge was to catch the jet stream towards Ireland. Nobody had ever flown in the jet stream before, and many people believed that the high winds would destroy the balloon and that traveling at speeds of 150 to 200 miles an hour could be fatal. But it worked.
We did pick up some tremendous speed on that flight. For us to have 80 to 100 knots was quite unique, and that's why we flew so quickly.
31 hours later, and just 200 miles off the coast of Northern Ireland, the balloon developed a problem.
Is it steady or climbing?
The vent at the top of the balloon wasn't opening properly, trapping excess heat in the envelope.
And we're finding great difficulty actually getting the balloon to go down. And obviously the danger of it, the solar heating working so well that we just go up to sort of 40 or 50,000 feet is something which is worrying us.
We eventually managed to get some control of the balloon back, but then immediately we were faced with another problem: horrendous winds.
So the option was to land in Ireland. We had bad weather in Ireland, there was a cold front lying across Northern Ireland, but that was our only choice. I came in to land, and the balloon was almost uncontrollable in that kind of weather. And we bounced, lost the fuel tanks, and I realized that it's too dangerous. We would end up in the power line, or we would hit the house or something like that. And therefore the choice was to land in the water, which we had trained for, and it was perfectly safe to do so.
Although we had prepared ourselves for the option of landing in water, we were also relying on special explosive bolts to fire and separate the capsule from the balloon itself.
The landing in the sea would have been a perfect routine landing had the explosive bolts worked. It would have been a nice clean separation of the capsule will float happily, and we were quite safe inside it. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. We came in to land, and I was at the controls, and we hit the water, and I fired the explosive bolts. Nothing happened.
The failure of the bolts now put Per and I in grave danger.
You don't remain in the capsule after firing the explosive bolts, because if they have partly severed and the balloon now will go up 200 feet and then the capsule will separate, you're going to fall to your death, of course. I screamed at Richard in the water. So Richard went up the ladder, I went up after him, and the balloon was now going by 12 knots in the water, surfing along with the envelope still attached to it. So I just went up, took one step, and I dived over the side in the water. I expected Richard to follow me immediately in the water.
But just as I was about to follow Per and jump, the balloon started to shoot up again. I was holding on outside the capsule for dear life as the balloon soared up to 15,000 feet. After nearly 2 days of crossing the Atlantic by balloon, our first attempt at breaking the record was in serious trouble. Forced to crash land in the Irish Sea, the explosive bolts that should have separated the balloon from the capsule had not fired. Our lives were now at risk.
My greatest concern was this capsule tumbling away from the balloon, because once activated and not functioning, you've got to get out there.
The next few minutes were amongst the loneliest of my life, standing on the edge of the balloon with my oxygen mask on, the parachute on, trying to pluck up the courage to jump into the sea, scribbling a note to my family. Then suddenly I realized that the balloon above me was the biggest parachute that anyone could ever have. So I climbed back in and started flying it back towards the sea. By this time, Per had been in the sea for nearly 30 minutes.
Once in the water, I orientated myself and realized we were about 4 kilometers from the beach, which isn't too bad to swim. I'm a good swimmer. I started swimming and realized suddenly the tide is going out. The tide had exactly the same speed as I was swimming. I had 2 islands on my right, which I lined up. And now I started getting worried. I realized that it's only 12 degrees in the water. I keep swimming and swimming and make very little progress. One lifeboat from Port Leach passed me without looking at me. 2 helicopters went right over me, not looking. And I was about 1.5 kilometers from the beach. I started really getting tired, and I thought, it doesn't look very good.
As the balloon approached the sea, I climbed back on top of the capsule and got ready to jump downwind. As I hit the water, I had the most wonderful feeling of being alive, and as I surfaced, I saw a Navy helicopter right above me. When I asked about Per, I was shocked to find that he still hadn't been picked up.
But then he said suddenly, "What is Per?" "Oh," said the guy, "there were 2 of you in there."
After 2 hours in the freezing cold Irish Sea, Per was located, and miraculously, he was still alive.
It was definitely the closest call I ever had. I don't think I would have lasted more than 10 minutes.
Well, despite crashing into the Irish Sea, we were still the first hot air balloonists to have ever crossed the Atlantic. Just.
Any doubt about a world record is gone. They touch the ground.
It says something, I think, about the undertaking that hasn't even been attempted since.
For British climber Paul Pritchard, the Australian island of Tasmania provided him with the toughest challenge he would ever face. He was one of the greatest climbers of his generation and a prize-winning writer on his sport. In February 1998, Paul and his former girlfriend Celia Bull got the opportunity they'd always dreamt about, a chance to attend Tasmania's infamous totem pole.
The most challenging thing about the totem pole is all these elemental forces come into play to stack the chances against you. It's like climbing a vertical side of a brick wall house for 60 metres. No world climbing tour would be complete without it. But it all went awry.
It was on Friday the 13th that Paul and Celia set out for the 8-kilometre walk to the awe-inspiring geographical feature. As is customary, they abseiled down to the bottom of the rock before making the dangerous climb back up.
I probably made about 3 moves up on the rope. I swung off the rock. And then everything went black.
A small boulder had fallen 30 metres from the peak of the totem pole and struck Paul's head.
I lost consciousness without really knowing what was going on. And the next thing that I noticed was that I was upside down and blood was pouring into the sea. The sea was probably only a metre below my head. And the tide was coming in.
This serious head injury rendered Paul completely helpless. Without a boat below, Celia had to try to get him back up to the top on her own.
I think Celia explained to me what had happened and that some rocks had fallen off, but I didn't really understand it. She then climbed back up the rope to the halfway ledge and then commenced this mammoth effort of hauling me back up to the ledge. I remember her shouting, "You got to help me, you got to help me if we're going to get you out of this." So I tried to help her, and that's when I realised that my right side wasn't working.
Somehow, Celia managed to haul Paul to the halfway ledge and secured him to the rock. She then ran the 8 kilometres to the nearest telephone for help. Unable to move and critically ill, Paul lay waiting alone and frightened on the ledge.
I remember putting my hand under my helmet and feeling this huge hole in my skull. And when I pulled my hand away, I mean, all this clear fluid on my hand. And I think at that point I did actually think, this is it, I'm going to die.
Meanwhile, the emergency services and a rescue team were on their way.
Initial information indicated a climber injured on the candlestick, in fact, which is another rock structure right beside the totem pole. At that point, we didn't have too many other details.
As they reached the rock, paramedic Neil Smith quickly assessed the severity of Paul's situation.
The ledge we were on was probably 2 metres long by 1 metre wide. Basically, it had quite a pool of blood on it, covering most of that ledge. Paul was unconscious, and there were some body movements, but they were in no coordinated sort of manner.
The only way to get Paul off the rock was by using a rescue vessel in the sea below, a dangerous procedure.
I was tied to him and he was just kind of abseiling down to a boat, a waiting boat with me.
Getting into the boat wasn't quite as easy as we hoped. The boat had to come in and out a couple of times with it just rocking with a swell. And on the third time that it came in, I managed to grab that with my legs and physically pull it towards me. And once we were low enough into the boat, I just got the policeman in the boat to cut the ropes.
10 hours after the accident, Paul and Celia were raced to the nearest hospital. Waiting for him was a nurse who was to play a significant role in his future.
I remember coming on early shift and night staff had come in and said there'd been a horrible rock climbing accident down on the Tasman Peninsula, and I kind of panicked a bit because I know a lot of the rock climbing community here. I remember going to the computer, saw the name P. Pritchard, which I didn't recognise at all, and I kind of was quite relieved that I didn't know them.
Paul needed to have bone fragments removed from his brain and a partial skull reconstruction.
I don't think that I realised how serious my injury was until I'd come out of intensive care about 4 days later. And I realised that my right arm and right leg were like wooden poles. There's no life in them at all. And all I could do was break down in tears all the time.
Paul had not only lost the use of the right side of his body, but he'd also lost his ability to communicate normally.
I had to learn how to talk again. That was a really frustrating part of it, really, for me.
Even though he was unable to speak, he still made an impression on Jane.
It was hard because he couldn't really say much. When I first met him, he was like kind of super polite, I guess, and I guess very reserved type, I guess, because he was still pretty much in shock himself of what had happened.
Some doctors here said to my face that I would never walk again and that I would never talk again, which was really, really cruel, in fact, because with a head injury, you never know. You never know what's going to happen.
Paul spent a further month in Hobart before being airlifted back to the UK to begin the long process of recovery. By now, his condition was putting a tremendous strain on his relationship with Celia.
We split up as a couple, which, I mean, I'm not saying that. Anyway, we're not together anymore. Did you roll the ball away with me?
I think I'm luckily a very positive person. I think that's what really got me through this, because it's quite a long time, you know. It's like was 9 months in rehab. It would be the same thing day in, day out. Speech therapy, physiotherapy, just learning how to dress yourself and shower yourself, and it was really, I can't describe it.
Happily, Paul not only regained his power of speech, but was eventually able to walk again. And such was his strength of character that a year later, in 1999, he decided to return to the rock that almost defeated him.
I think as a writer, returning to the totem pole was actually really important for me, because I realised that I had such an amazing story to write, and I realised that the only conclusion would be returning to it.
As he watched a climber on the totem pole, Paul recorded his thoughts for a new book.
I have like a silent feeling, like a memory. And I also have these adrenaline surges that keep kind of hitting me like a sledgehammer or something. And to see him climbing there, I guess I just wish that I'd have climbed it.
While in Tasmania, Paul decided to look up a nurse that had played a vital role in his recovery, Jane.
I took some time off work to take him sightseeing around the state, and we just hit it off like massively.
And realised kind of that we loved each other, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, so it was pretty quick, I guess, yeah.
Paul and Jane are now not only happily married and living in Tasmania, but they now have a child, Caddy.
I never really thought that I would want a child up until having this accident, and now it seems really quite important for me to have a family. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's something to do with continuing the genes and having, making yourself immortal. I'm not sure.
Paul was able to put the incident behind him, but not all victims of trauma are so lucky.
I'm certainly much more aware these days of what the sea can do. It's just nightmares that come back to you all the time.
There are few challenges as exciting and unpredictable as offshore yacht racing. Offshore racing is one of the most dangerous sports on the planet. At the absolute mercy of sea conditions, your boat becomes your whole world, and your crew becomes your most important lifeline. Sydney, the centre of Australia's sailing community and departure point for the sport's most prestigious prize. The Sydney to Hobart race annually represents one of sailing's toughest challenges. In December 1998, the annual competition for Rob Matthews and his crew was to become a race for survival.
The start of the Hobart race is on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas Day, and it's really something you have to see to believe. It's enormous. There's literally hundreds of thousands of people around Sydney Harbour. There are thousands of spectator boats out there to follow the fleet out through the heads and into the open ocean. The atmosphere is electric.
However, in 1998, the carnival atmosphere didn't last very long.
It became apparent to me very early in the afternoon, only a matter of hours after the start of the race, that something big was going to happen the next day, something unprecedented.
For Rob Matthews and the crew of his boat, the Business Post Naiad, the race to the finish became a race for survival.
During the afternoon, the weather deteriorated fairly rapidly, and the seas built enormously very quickly. They got to the stage where I'd never seen seas like it before. There was no panic at all amongst the crew. We'd been through what we thought were conditions like that before, and we were confident of the boat, we were confident of the crew.
But they were unaware of the intensity of the storm building around them.
We knew that we were in very severe conditions by late afternoon.
The conditions you just had to see to believe. The best way to describe them to the man in the street is walk outside and look at an 8-level building. And that's how big the waves were. They were about 80 feet high.
Initially, as the seas grew bigger, the crew were able to ride out the worst waves confronting them.
We'd been in breaking waves for 5 or 6 hours, and they'd been getting more severe, but nothing had looked like it was going to do anything apart from break over the boat.
However, the Naiad was suddenly thrown into turmoil.
The rain and the spume that was being blown off the water was hitting your face like needles, like driving nails into your eyes. We could hear a wave coming, but you couldn't see it in the dark. I remember it happened that quickly that I couldn't steer the boat up into the wave. It just smashed into us side on, lifted us up, bang on the roof.
A giant wave took the Naiad completely by surprise and capsized the boat, trapping Rob and the crew underneath.
I was under the water and I was running out of breath. I may have only been there 15 or 20 seconds and I realised it wasn't going to come up. After I'd been under there and nearly out of breath, I picked my head up and stuck my nose right up in the cockpit just as a wave lifted us. I got my nose up in a little pocket of air, took a big snortful of air, and the boat went under again. That pocket of air absolutely saved my life.
Rob managed to unclip himself and swim under the boat. He desperately tried to look for Phil.
I was yelling out for Phil. The wind and spume and the noise out there made it nearly impossible for anybody to hear anything anyway. But he never came to the surface.
After what seemed like an eternity, the boat eventually righted itself and they found the body of Phil Skeggs.
We managed to roll Phil over onto his back. We felt for a pulse in his neck and his wrists. It was just that violent that we couldn't really tell whether there was a pulse.
The yachts in the Sydney to Hobart race were in serious trouble. They'd run into one of the worst storms ever seen in the Tasman Sea. As dawn broke, Rob became concerned about the whereabouts of the skipper, Bruce Guys.
Matthew, Sheriff and myself were out on deck hoping for any sight of a ship or a plane, some form of rescue. And I said to Matthew, haven't seen Bruce around, and he said, didn't you know, Bruce died last night.
2 members of the Naiad crew had now perished. 7 were still alive. The boat was completely disabled. All they could do was pray to be rescued.
A fixed-wing aircraft flew by about 2 or 3 miles away. So straight away, Matthew fired off a parachute flare and the plane flew on. We didn't think they'd seen us.
But the stricken yacht had been spotted. The Careflight rescue helicopter was now on their way to the Naiad's location.
When we first come over the Naiad, the weather conditions out there were just atrocious. I'd never seen seas like this.
We knew we had no communications with the vessel at all, so then it was a matter of spending some time for ourselves to come up with a game plan to go ahead to provide the assistance. And by doing that, we knew that we needed to get somebody on board.
I looked up and there was a guy leaning out the door and he was pointing at me and pointing at the water.
He looked to the left and he looked to the right, and he thought, well, you mean me?
I wasn't going to leave the boat without some chance of getting back to it because the conditions were still horrendous. And I jumped off the stern of the boat, swam out about probably 30 feet, and the frogman, who I now know as Murray Trainer, came down on the wire and he landed probably about 4 feet in front of me. The next second it's like we were being bungee jumped backwards. We were just absolutely reefed out of the water.
It was vital for the rescue team to get as much information from Rob as possible.
We were told basically that there were 7 survivors, all had minor injuries only, and that the other 2, one man below decks and the other man lashed to the deck, those 2 were dead. Now, it may have sounded silly to the survivor, but I quizzed him pretty closely to make sure that he knew that these people were dead. I didn't want to get back to shore with 7 survivors and then suddenly have someone express doubt about whether the 2 people we'd left on the boat were in fact dead or not.
There were still 6 more crew members on the Naiad to be rescued. Time was running out.
I heard them say over the intercom that they'd only be able to get 4 because they were running low on fuel. And I can remember getting quite vocal at that stage and saying, you're not going to leave any of these blokes. You're going to have to try and get them all. And I heard the pilot say that they'd try and get them all.
I did not anticipate that we would winch all 7 on board the aircraft in that one sortie.
I was able to hear the conversations going on between the 3 of them. It seemed to me that the winch man was almost the guy in charge of the helicopter. He was yelling out, forward 2 feet, right 2 feet, left 3 feet. He's also keeping an eye on the waves. They were so fast at getting the guys to jump off the boat, and Murray on the end of the wire was just gathering them up and picking them up and herding us into the helicopter just so quickly.
The care flight team remarkably took a total of 20 minutes to evacuate the crew of the stricken yacht to safety. A truly amazing feat in such treacherous conditions.
To know that you've been able to assist somebody in a situation and knowing that those guys are on their way back to Tasmania to meet up with their families, very satisfying situation. I don't think anything could be any more sort of satisfying than that.
115 yachts started the race, but only 44 finished. Sadly, 6 sailors lost their lives in the freak storm. However, this death toll could have been much higher were it not for the extraordinary efforts of the rescue crews.
I'm certainly much more aware these days of what the sea can do. I'm certainly a much more emotional person these days. And I do, even big storms at home, I find that I can't sleep all that well. It's just nightmares that come back to you all the time.
Historically, the Arctic Circle has been the graveyard of polar expeditions. As one of the most extreme environments on our planet, temperatures at the North Pole can often plunge to minus 50 degrees. In February 2000, one of the world's great explorers, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, attempted to become the first person in history to walk solo to the North Pole.
I don't normally like to do an expedition by myself. In those regions, polar regions, north or south, I normally prefer to have at least one other colleague with me, because in the north there's a possibility of falling into the water and being unable to get yourself up the ice banks back onto the top.
Despite the dangers of a solo expedition, Fiennes was keen to attempt this challenge.
If you do fall into the water, you have only got yourself to get yourself out of the problem.
No solo unsupported human has ever made it to the pole by the direct route, which is the difficult route. So it hasn't been done before. Lots and lots of polar trips are done the whole time, like Mount Everest, but not by this route, not this way, which is the ultimate, the most difficult way.
He would face a 700-mile trek in his bid to reach the North Pole in conditions cold enough to freeze the fluid in his eyes. Fiennes had to train hard. He'd have to pull his 2,000-pound sledges up sheer ridges whilst trying to avoid cracks in the ice shelf to the freezing sea below. All this in a region roamed by polar bears.
I've not done an expedition up here before without somebody else. The polar bears only attack the back person. If there are 9 of you, they go for the 9th person. And I, as leader, I always made sure that I wasn't the back person, and therefore they would go for one of the others. On this occasion, obviously, there isn't a back person, so there's a feeling on the hairs on your back of your neck sometimes when you think you hear noises, or just after you've seen big prints.
Expecting problems with the treacherous ice floes, Fiennes decided upon an unconventional plan.
I decided I'd set out about a month earlier in the darkness, when you don't have sun all day, but of course you do have moonlight for 2 weeks and then not for the next 2 weeks. So I thought that by doing this, I would be able to, although it would be extremely cold and dark to begin with, it would get me out a long way towards the pole by the time the ice deteriorated badly.
The Arctic Circle stays dark for 182 days a year. Fiennes believed that setting off before the Arctic Spring would ensure the ice he was travelling over would stay firm. But he didn't account for the actions of the moon.
Because the full moon has an effect on the sea, and when the sea surged, all the ice floes on top of it cracked. And so there was a lot more sea all around in the dark and a lot of noise of tons of breaking ice. I ended up in an unhealthy situation.
With the ice cracking around him, Fiennes became trapped on a narrow ridge.
The sledge behind me slipped off the apex down over the broken blocks, and with 300 pounds pulling downwards, I slipped and came off the ridge and started falling down into the sea.
To stop himself being dragged into the water and slipping under the ice, he had to detach himself from his sinking sledge. However, the sledge contained his essential survival kit.
I had no alternative but to try and find where it was snagged under the ice. So on my stomach, I sort of eeled down, rather like someone fishing for tadpoles in a pond, and put my hand down under the ice to try and find where it was snagged to pull it.
He plunged his left hand into the icy water. His wet fingers were then exposed to the brutal -50-degree air. Although he had successfully retrieved his sledge, he now faced an even more serious problem.
If you're doing an expedition by yourself in the Arctic Ocean and you have frostbitten fingers and you try to continue, you'll end up dead.
He knew that his frostbitten hand needed urgent medical attention, and 2 weeks into the expedition, in the middle of the Arctic Circle, he had to find a way back.
I knew there was a place called Ward Hunt Island. There wasn't actually anybody there, but there was a hut which had been lived in by an expedition that I had led 10 years or 15 years previously. So I knew exactly where it was, or I thought I did.
After 24 hours, Fiennes made it to the hut and was able to radio for help. 2 days later, he was airlifted back to Canada. Although he was leaving the immediate danger of the Arctic Circle, the accident had a long-lasting effect.
Within 3 days of the accident, I was in a hospital, and they said, well, they'd have to amputate a certain amount. And so they peeled off all the blistered skin. I forget the word they used, but that was not a pleasant experience. And so you've got 1 inch to 1.5 inches of red, gnarled, mummified finger sticking out, which puts people off, children scream.
It can take months for the true extent of frostbite to reveal itself. Once tissue has died, it rarely regenerates. But where living tissue meets dead tissue, some of the cells can start to regrow. Fiennes was told he would have to wait 5 months before they could finally tidy up the ends of his fingers.
Well, about 1 month into this waiting period, I was getting extremely irritable and unpleasant because in everyday life, you just can't not hit things with fingers. And every time the ends of one of these dead fingers knocked against something, even slightly, one's language became extremely bad.
The pain became so unbearable he decided to take matters into his own hands. With no anaesthetic or surgical tools, he set about amputating his frostbitten fingers in his garden shed.
To do this with 2 different operations, at a cost of about £6,000 uncovered by the insurance, wasn't a very good idea when you could do it yourself. So common sense dictated that I could do it myself.
Fiennes' first surgical procedure on his own frostbitten hand was luckily a success, and 4 months later, proper surgeons tidied up the end of his fingers.
That's a standard thumb. That's the one I cut off, so there's probably about an inch missing. I don't want to be conceited, but I think a pretty good job. Didn't cost anything at all, and the result was a great improvement over the next 4 months waiting for the operation.
Fiennes made a full recovery from the accident. His solo attempt to reach the North Pole remained unchallenged until the 19th of May 2003, when fellow British explorer Pen Hadow achieved Fiennes' goal. Challenges like an Arctic crossing require the most intricate planning. However, even the best laid plans cannot account for freak occurrences.
Just as we were letting go of the plane to commence the skydive, the reserve parachute came whizzing past my head.
In 1986, I decided to undertake my first skydive as part of my preparations for crossing the Atlantic by balloon. Fortunately, I had 2 very experienced skydivers with me. I pulled the wrong ripcord and I lost the main parachute. But luckily, my fast-thinking instructor caught up with me and pulled the cord on my reserve chute. The accident was a sharp reminder. Skydiving is a very dangerous sport. One small mistake can lead to disaster. In April 2001, a group of experienced Australian skydivers were training for a competition later in the year.
The team was preparing for the national championships that were being held in December of that year.
I was actually filling in for that weekend for their normal cameraman. He had something else on.
It was their 9th training jump of the day. I think it was about my 11th flight of the day, so just about on every flight of the day. It was a beautiful day, blue sky, perfect day for skydiving.
As the pilot, Barry would normally have little reason to wear a parachute.
My partner Dawn made me wear the parachute that day. I would wear it one day and then not one day, but she made me stick it on that day.
At 14,000 feet, the skydivers prepared for their jump.
As we were climbing out for that jump, everyone set themselves in position, and just as we were letting go of the plane to commence the skydive, the reserve parachute came whizzing past my head.
One of the skydivers' reserve parachutes had accidentally opened as he got ready to jump. He was dragged out of the plane, and the force of the wind wrapped the reserve chute and the skydiver around the tail of the plane, putting enormous pressure on the aircraft.
About 2-ton pull force on the end of the tailplane. After 11 seconds fighting with the plane like that, in that condition, the tail actually separated.
As the rest of the divers jumped out, Simon's camera continued to capture the unfolding events. Eventually, the tail separated from the plane, with the skydiver still attached.
As it was sort of nosediving towards the ground, that as I'm free-falling behind it, hoping that, wishing that Barry, get out of the plane, get out of the plane.
How I reacted was to try and get everyone out before it lost it completely. I just started screaming at them as hard as I could to get out.
Once sure that all the skydivers had exited the plane, Barry made his move.
So I shut the plane down, shut the engine down, turned the fuel off, gave a mayday call, and then proceeded to exit the plane.
However, once Barry relinquished the controls, the plane went into a deadly spin.
It just wound up and I just got pushed straight to the floor. My foot got caught around the seat belts. I couldn't quite get my foot out. I had to slip a boot off.
You can see the ground getting closer and realising that, you know, there's not a whole lot of time left. And it's like, come on, come on, come on.
I thought I was going to die. I couldn't get the door open. It was jamming against itself. The plane was picking up speed. It was really starting to accelerate towards the ground. I could get a glimpse of the horizon. I knew I was getting down to about 5,000 or 6,000 feet. And I knew that if I didn't get that door open really quickly, that it was going to be curtains. The thought of not seeing my daughter again just made me somehow strength come over me, and I just got the door open and I knew I had to get out.
At the last possible second, Barry managed to jump out of the doomed aircraft and deploy his parachute.
It was a matter of 2 or 3 seconds that I saw Barry's parachute open until the plane impacted with the ground.
Once back on the ground, Simon, with camera still rolling, ran to Barry's aid.
I just got out. The door was shut. I couldn't get the door open. Oh, fast.
When I look back on it now, I think I'm extremely lucky. I was just able to get that door open and get out just in the nick of time.
Sadly, the skydiver wrapped around the tail of the plane died when the aircraft hit the ground. The team has not jumped together since.
I felt heartbroken. To lose a good friend like that, it's a hard thing for anyone to go through. But we had to dig deep into our hearts and go, well, at least he died doing something that he did enjoy doing.
Without Dawson's brave efforts, there would have been many more victims.
I think I'm a little bit more appreciative of life. Family means a lot to me. Now I think I respect a lot more the people that are really close to you. When you think you're about to die, that's what you're thinking of. You're not thinking about paying your phone bill.
The 20th century has a rich history of exploration and adventure, and I feel proud to be in part of that tradition.
It was the 54th race, and there'd never been a drama in the previous 53 races. But the Hobart race is on the way back again. It's a great race, it's a classic, and it will continue to grow, and it'll continue to go from strength to strength.
He himself would want us to go on skydiving as well, doing what he loved as well.
Engineering has always been progressed by record attempts, people taking things to the limits. And that is why we're having jet airplanes today, that's why we have high-speed trains and so on. You've got to try the limits and make it go faster and better.
But will the 21st century see the same desire to push the boundaries even further, despite the dangers? I certainly hope so.
Every year, thousands of people are victims of animal attacks. These incidents can happen anywhere in the world, and people can be seriously injured, perhaps even killed.
It just happened so quickly. Just came straight at me and Andrea. I was just thinking, I'm gonna die.
Heard the sound of bones crunching and all sorts of things. It was pretty horrible.
I put this hand in, and the tiger was lying down. And when I put the hand in, the tiger literally just jumped up and got hold of the hand.
Wild animals, whether in captivity or the wilderness, will always retain their natural instincts. This lion will never lose the ability to kill with a single bite or a swipe of the paws. In 20 years as a naturalist, I've lost count of the numbers of species of animals I've worked with. Some of them are potentially deadly, like these lions. I try to learn their behaviour, and with that knowledge, I can usually predict how animals are going to react. But you can't all the time, and I've had some pretty unnerving moments and some nasty bites. But there's one thing I've learnt from all these encounters: you have got to keep concentration. Lose that for a split second and the consequences can be fatal. The crocodile is one of the most intimidating of all the animals I've worked with. Even for experienced handlers, the behaviour of these reptiles can be dangerously unpredictable. As wildlife ranger Charlie Finn found out whilst working at the Billabong Wildlife Sanctuary in Townsville, Australia.
Working with any dangerous animal is a potentially dangerous job. You've always got a little bit of uncertainty. You can never fully know really what an animal's going to do.
Charlie worked closely with these crocs for 3 years without incident. One of his favourites was a large female.
Now, the crocodile who I had my argument with was called Hot Lips, and she was a bit of a good-looking female crocodile, I guess you could say. She was a bit over 2 metres long and probably weighed 75 to 80 kilos. So the owner of the park gave her the name Hot Lips, after the MASH character.
Estuarine or saltwater crocodiles like these are the biggest species of crocodile in the world and the most fiercely protective mothers.
She'd just laid 80 to 90 eggs in a nest that they build of grass, soil and debris, and they will protect that nest extremely aggressively from any predator.
Charlie went in to collect her eggs. Before doing this, it's essential to remove the female from her nest. That's not always easy.
Now, with lassoing any type of crocodile at all in that situation, it's very important to lasso them around the top of the jaw, where their teeth can be used to hold the noose. When you do that, you pull the lasso tight, and you can then pull her out of the enclosure. It was my job in that situation to make sure that the rope was pulled tight, because when the rope's pulled tight, the crocodile won't lunge forward. She or he will only ever pull back.
A local TV crew were filming whilst Charlie was performing this tricky procedure.
2 rangers then hopped on the back of the female crocodile and found she was a bit stronger than they thought she was, and they were both rolled off her.
It was then the crocodile attacked, catching Charlie in her jaws.
The moment I let a bit of slack loose on the rope, I reached forward to grab my stick, and that left her free to lunge forward. Now, she grabbed the closest thing she could see, which happened to be my hand.
Locked onto his arm, the crocodile went into an instinctive death roll. This is how they dismember their prey.
So she grabbed me by the hand, and I think she probably did 4 or 5 spins, and I tried to keep up, but she was much quicker at spinning than I was. I did a somersault, landed on my back, heard the sound of bones crunching. It was pretty horrible. I knew that if I was to pull back with my arm and do anything like that, the likelihood was that she'd be powerful enough to take off my forearm and my hand, or both.
Once the crocodile had let go of Charlie's arm, a fellow ranger quickly intervened. He managed to get the reptile under control.
The pain was tremendous, actually. I've never felt pain like it, and the pain, it started straight away. I can remember seeing her grab my hand, and of course that was immediately extremely painful. And then as she spun me, the wrist and the elbow joint, extremely painful. A couple of the staff very quickly put a tourniquet on my hand, which was bleeding quite badly, and they were trying to do the right thing. They picked me up, and one of them had me over their shoulder, and I had nowhere to put my arm, and it was flopping about like a rag doll. It was probably a good 20 minutes before the ambulance arrived, but I can remember it being probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. The pain was really quite unbearable.
The most damage was inflicted, not from the crocodile's teeth, but from the twisting during the death roll.
The main damage was done to the elbow joint, and it pulled that out of its socket, broke the elbow, dislocated the elbow, spun my forearm around 4 or 5 times. I ended up with a dislocated elbow, a broken wrist, a few broken hand bones, a few broken fingers, a bit of nerve damage in my hand, and a lot of lacerations, quite deep lacerations in the hand and the fingers. I lost, I think it was officially 40% use of my elbow, so I can't straighten the elbow out, and I can't bring it back fully.
Crocodiles are the most lethal predators in fresh water. This is the Nile crocodile of Africa, which can grow over 20 feet long and weigh over 2 tons. They can tackle prey as large as buffalo. Crocodiles may appear lethargic, but they can strike with frightening power and speed. During the nesting season, the females are very territorial and they'll do anything to guard their young.
She was extremely scared at the time. We were taking her out of a comfortable area and she was protecting herself. If anything, it was my fault for momentarily taking the slack off the rope. If I hadn't have done that, the crocodile wouldn't have lunged forward. It would have only pulled back. When you're working with a dangerous animal, even if you have all these rules and guidelines in place, things can happen. And I guess, that can be part of the excitement of the job too.
With his arm still in plaster, Charlie went back to work just 5 weeks later.
I can remember being a little bit worried when I went back to work about how I would cope with being back in with the crocodiles. And, that was something that was phased in fairly slowly.
The aptly named Hot Lips is still there, but Charlie has since given up working with dangerous animals.
Sadly, I'm no longer in that industry. It was time to move on. Now I work in a completely different field, but there wouldn't be a day go by where I wouldn't be thinking about the animals I work with and the fun I had. Yeah, great job to have.
Many animal species have been exploited for circuses and sideshows, but however well they're trained, their natural instincts can always come to the surface, and when they do, they can attack without warning.
It just happened so quickly. Just came straight at me and Andrea.
You wouldn't think a harmless herbivore like a giraffe could be dangerous, but any big wild animals can be a threat. Look at those hooves. They can actually split the skull of a lion. Instinct can't be trained out of any wild animal. And if they're stressed or fatigued in captivity, they can turn in an instant. And if the animal involved is as powerful as an elephant, the consequences can be tragic. Across the world, some of the most popular tourist destinations use the local wildlife to attract holidaymakers. Jeff Taylor took his 2 daughters, Andrea and Helen, on a trip to Thailand in April 2000 after the death of their mother.
My dad had took voluntary redundancy and we were like, what are we going to get out of it? And he said, well, how about a holiday to Thailand? And me and Andrea were well up for it. She kept texting me and phoning me all the time, just saying, can't wait to go, and I've bought a new bikini and we bought this and can't wait to be there and we're going to do this and we're going to do that.
The rest of the family had been to Pattaya before. They were looking forward to showing Andrea the sights.
We've been there about 8 days and everything was going fine.
The highlight of the family's trip was to be an elephant show.
You have elephants wandering around outside, mainly female ones and baby ones. And you can go up and feed them bananas. And me and Andrea bought a bunch of bananas, fed them. And then you buy tickets for the shows.
Both had a ride on the back of the elephants a few hours before. Went for a trip round the park and then we went into the show.
They bring elephants through in traditional dress costumes with people on top, and you go round to what they call the corral, where it's all outside and you've got 3 sides of people sitting down watching the elephants do tricks.
Unconcerned, they took their seats at the front.
Previously me and my dad had sat on the front row anyway, so we thought everything was absolutely fine at the time. It was just watching the show.
The handlers, called mahouts, began their traditional routine.
The show had been going about 5-10 minutes and suddenly all the world fell apart.
The mahouts come down, stood on male elephants' tusks either side of the trunk.
As they approach you, one goes to the right and one goes to the left.
And on this occasion, the mahout seemed to go to jump back on its head and then fall or jump off. We don't, to this day, really know. But whatever happened, he didn't seem to be in control of the elephant at the time.
Suddenly, the bull elephant charged.
The speed of it was all over in 5 to 10 seconds.
It just happened so quickly. Just came straight at me and Andrea. And I was just thinking, I'm going to die.
I got hit and my legs were tucked underneath them.
Its tusk went into me and its trunk sent our Andrea flying back. And I just thought, Andrea's got out the way.
You couldn't understand what had happened at first. There's just total chaos. People were screaming. We seemed to be there an eternity.
I remember the guy wafting his t-shirt over my face to try and keep me awake because I was wanting just to pass out.
Although Helen was injured, Andrea was in an even worse state.
I could hear Andrea saying, "Somebody get it off me." And when I managed to twist myself round, I could see the elephant's head was touching the floor, but its tusks were in Andrea's back. So I leaned over her and I don't know why, I pushed on its trunk and it suddenly let go and backed off. When I looked down her side, a t-shirt had rolled up. You could see her innards coming out. And then when I looked down, I could see the blood coming from underneath her back. I looked down at her leg and all the skin had been took off her right shin. So it obviously looked like it was broke. And she said, "I can't feel my legs then, my legs are going numb." I said, "Oh, I think you broke your leg, don't worry about it." I couldn't see Helen at first. And then when I looked down, I could see her she's about 15 foot away. She was flat on her back, with just her knees bent up in the air. I suddenly thought, my leg's sore, and when I looked down, my leg was ripped open.
They knew that Andrea was seriously injured. There was no time to wait for an ambulance, so they took a taxi to the nearest hospital.
They were pretty good at getting us there. They went through every red light they possibly could. They just had the horn on constantly, and our Andrea was just lying completely out on the back seat. And I remember I had my knees jammed up against the dashboard because all my injuries were around my stomach.
During the frantic drive to the hospital, the sisters exchanged words of comfort.
Our Andrea was talking to me. She was going, "I've got a broken leg and I think there's some damage to my back." She was coming out with these nursing explanations, with her training to be a nurse, and she thought she was going to be fine.
Jeff and the girls were all rushed straight through to emergency. During treatment, Jeff passed out.
The next thing I knew, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and I was in a ward on my own. When I made inquiries, they said Helen was badly injured because it ripped through her bladder and intestines and she lost an ovary. So there may be a doubt about having children.
But there was still no news of his other daughter.
Andrew was being looked at. That was all I knew. But then 7 o'clock the following morning, British Embassy phoned me up and told me she'd passed away. She died about 8:30, 9 o'clock the previous night.
Helen was the last to know. Still in intensive care, the doctors felt the news could hinder her recovery. But she demanded to know the truth.
And he was like, how are you feeling today? And I was like, "Where's Andrea? I want to see Andrea. I've seen my dad twice now. Why haven't I seen her? I want to go and see her. I don't care what state she's in. I want to go and see her." And he just had this blank look on his face, and I went, "Just tell me what's going on. I want to know now." And he told me that she'd actually died on the operating theatre table about 8 o'clock in the evening on the Monday. And I still didn't take it in at all. I remember my dad coming down and seeing me, and he was in tears, and I just said, "Dad, I don't even understand what's gone wrong. Why has this happened?" She was, training to be a nurse. She was such a lively, friendly person. She had so many friends. And to lose that, it's like nothing you can describe, really.
As shocking as Helen and Jeff Taylor's story is, it's not unique. Since 1990, captive elephants have been responsible for 65 deaths and 130 injuries. The relationship between the mahouts and their charges is usually based on mutual respect, but some elephants are trained with cruelty, and sometimes these animals can react in a dangerous manner.
The footage that we have of elephants being beaten and chained and restrained in Thailand is very alarming. It should not surprise us at all that animals who are forced into submission, animals who are beaten with bull hooks and who are chained most of their lives, will sometimes go a bit mad and will fight back.
During the mating season, male elephants go into muths, a time when hormones make them highly volatile.
Which means it was in season, and it shouldn't have even been used in the show at the time, because they could become very aggressive.
Sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're feeling friendly, sometimes they're curious, and sometimes in this particular case the elephant became outraged, and what we see in the video is the result.
After the attack, the elephant was chained up for 3 months before being returned to the same show where he's still performing to this day.
We have no way of knowing if this elephant is ever going to kill again, or if there's going to be another tragedy involving this animal.
Both me and Helen said at the time, we don't want the elephant put down, because it is a wild animal. It's not the elephant's fault itself. It's just not been controlled.
The Taylors have taken their case to the Thai courts, but are still awaiting the verdict.
My life will never be the same. To lose my mum 5 years ago, and then to lose my sister nearly 3 years ago now. You never expect to lose one person in your family, but to lose two is just, it's beyond belief.
Captive elephants are mostly gentle and benign, but we shouldn't forget they're also intelligent and powerful creatures that should always be shown respect.
Cute and adorable, just 3 months old, a tiger cub. But you can never forget these are top predators. It can scratch and bite now, but just imagine what it can do when it's fully grown and 8 feet long from the nose to the tip of the tail. Wild animals, even those born in captivity, can never be completely trusted. Can you?
Chipperfield Circus has been running for 300 years. To date, they still controversially use animals, including big cats, in their shows. Nigel Wesson had been working at the circus for only 10 days when he was temporarily placed in charge of the tigers.
I was asked on to go and look after the big cats for 2 weeks, and like a fool I said yes. I was basically looking after them all day, which is basically feed them, put them out for exercise.
Although he had no experience with tigers, Nigel was unfazed by his new responsibilities. On the morning of the 25th of February 1998, he went in to feed them.
And I was just having to move them from where I fed them to where they were going to sleep, which just involves pulling some slides out. You should use a hook to open the cages, but it's so much easier just to put your hand in, start the slide off, and then bring the hand out and continue opening the slide. Being left-handed meant that I put this hand in, and the tiger was lying down, and when I put the hand in, the tiger literally just jumped up and got hold of the hand. You're talking 20-stone tiger on the end of your arm.
The tiger sank its teeth into his arm and slowly worked its jaws up towards his elbow.
Most people think that it came up, got hold and went chomp, chomp, chomp. It didn't. It just came up, got hold and stood there. What I was trying to do, I was trying to put this hand in, poke it in the eye to get it let go. And it's standing there looking at me, and I'm standing there looking at it. And I've got a bar there, I've got a bar here, I've got a bar there. So I'm stuck. And I'm thinking, this is not a good idea. I started shouting for help. And it stood there and then thought it was tasting nice, and I started to scream for help. So it ended up with Roger hanging on the end of my arm with both claws in the forearm. So I basically just twisted and pulled, and we separated at the elbow.
Paramedic Chris Hurley was first on the scene.
We see an awful lot of injuries, but this is the first one, and so far the only one I've seen caused by a tiger. The tiger had bitten onto his hand and then pulled his hand and arm into the cage. The tiger then bit further up the arm at the elbow and had removed the flesh and tissue from Nigel's hand, leaving Nigel with just one single bone going up to the wrist. Nigel had been given very good first aid at scene before our arrival. One of his colleagues had stemmed the blood flow from his torn limb and reduced the blood loss quite substantially. Obviously, with an injury of such nature, he could have lost a vast amount of blood, and it's possible that over time it could have been a life-threatening injury.
He was flown by helicopter to the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. At first, still in shock, Nigel felt little discomfort, but he soon began to feel phantom pains from his lost limb.
And when I lost it, for the next half hour, it wasn't really, I would say, that painful. Fingers were itching like mad, but the arm itself wasn't that painful. When the helicopter was landing in the hospital, it then really started to hurt again.
Whilst we transferred him, I was supporting his arm, which was giving him a little bit of pain relief.
Chris stayed with him throughout the ordeal.
Nigel was fully conscious throughout. He maintained a great sense of humour and good spirit, despite his injuries. Remarkable chap.
The surgeons tried to save what remained of his arm.
In some circumstances, it may be possible to reattach a limb that has been severed, but the damage caused by the tiger to the arm after it had been severed was too great to have been able to reattach. They asked if the arm was available, and unfortunately we had to tell them that the tiger still had the arm.
They did ask in hospital, is the arm coming? And I said, no, it's inside a tiger. There wasn't enough left below the elbow to make it worth saving. So they've actually shortened the arm up to about here, which makes it a lot easier to put the artificial arm on. Plus it then got rid of any possibility of infection from the tiger bite.
We'll give you something through one of these taps in your arm that sends you off to sleep, okay?
Yeah, possibly better.
Are you allergic to anything?
Tigers.
I've got a black sense of humour anyway, so that when they ask me, am I allergic to anything? So what do you answer after you had your arm eaten by a tiger? Yes, tigers.
Nigel was in hospital for 4 weeks, enduring a further 2 operations.
The first one was the night when I was brought in, where they just basically shortened it up and neatened it up. And then a couple of days later, when they checked there was no serious infection, then they sewed it all up again.
Once he recovered, Nigel could go back to what he loved best, working with animals. The circus didn't destroy the tiger because Nigel broke one of the cardinal rules, to never put any part of your body into the cage.
People ask me, you know, do I want the tiger put down? I said, no, I mean, he was only playing. No, I mean, he's beautiful. Wasn't his fault.
When this cub grows up, he'll be lethal. Clearly, people working with adult tigers need to be aware of the risks involved and have great training. Basic safety procedures have to be followed, and if they're not, you can get in big trouble.
Silly accident. I took a shortcut at work and 99 times out of 100 you get away with it, and just this once I didn't.
Since the 1970s, there's been constant stories about big cats roaming the British countryside. This is a black panther, the dark form of the leopard. Despite many eyewitness reports, there's been very little evidence to back up these sightings. And then there was a recent incident in the sleepy village of Trellick in South Wales, which just added to the mystery.
I had claw marks exactly 1 inch apart all the way from right here to under my chin.
Stories about big cats roaming around Britain have become part of rural folklore. If there are black panthers out there, I certainly wouldn't want to meet one on a dark night. They've got teeth and claws that are 1.5 inches long, and a mauling from a cat like that could cause serious injury or even kill.
The farming community of Trellick in South Wales has a population of just over 2,000. 11-year-old Josh Hopkins was walking with his brother and some friends in a field near his home.
There was 4 of us up the woods, me, Jeremy, Emily and Amy. Me and Emily started walking, and she waited at the top. I'm going back. See you later.
Josh left the others to go and look for his pet cat Sylvester.
I got down to the post over there, and he ran off.
The domestic cat had sensed danger.
Started calling it, and I saw a tail in the grass, so I thought, oh, that must be Sylvester. And when I approached it and got a bit close, it was a bit bigger than I thought, and it went up on its back legs, caught me with its its paw here. And then I screamed and it like stopped, ran off towards the farm up there, and I went that way to warn my brother and the other lot that there was a big cat.
Run! Run!
Wounded, the terrified Josh ran to warn his friends of the danger.
Run!
I met up with him and he said, "Oh, what happened?" I told him what happened, and then we all came back to the house.
His mother Rosemary was shocked when she saw her injured son.
His face was just blood all running down his face. So I opened the door and he just kept on insisting, "No, Mum, it was a cat. It was a big cat. It was as big as our dog."
My mum thought I'd fallen out of a tree because I had all this blood on my face and all. She didn't really believe me at the start. When I got all cleaned up, she saw the claw marks.
It was clear that his wounds were caused by something far bigger than any domestic animal.
I could see the scratches down his face were, even though there was a lot of blood there, were clean. Almost like a razor blade had been down his face.
I had claw marks exactly an inch apart, all the way from right here to under my chin.
And then when I looked under his chin, he'd got a hole under his chin where he said the cat had hooked him with its paw. The police arrived and they had a good look at Josh, and they were quite happy to accept that it was a big cat, because there had been big cat reports around here for several years.
It seems as if this case has added to the growing list of evidence.
They suggested that they contact the cat expert to come and talk to Josh, find out exactly what happened, so that he can work out what it was that attacked him.
Big cat expert Danny Nineham has his own theory about how these animals came to be in Britain.
People used to walk these big cats around on leads, just like you have a domestic dog.
The Dangerous Wild Animals Act of 1976 forced owners to licence their pets or have them put down.
People then had to either get the licence, take them to a zoo, but zoos don't want them. The third option then was to take them out into the countryside and totally release them.
These big cats may have bred in the wild.
In the last 10 years, I've dealt with 500 cases of big cat sightings throughout the UK, and 40 of those are close encounters and non-fatal attacks on people.
The police wouldn't have put big cat in the equation, even though they're always reported, but they're treated like UFOs and fairies at the bottom of the garden, aren't they?
But Josh's case was unique. His attack yielded physical evidence.
The adult female cuffed Josh across his face with the claws semi-retracted. If they'd have been fully retracted, they wouldn't have had no damage to his face.
Now, he said normally one of these cats, when it attacks, they extend their claws right out and it would have ripped his face off.
And when I told his mother this, she was physically sick.
From Josh's vivid description of the animal, it appears he'd been extremely lucky to escape with just scratches.
Josh luckily didn't run. He stood his ground and kept and maintained eye contact, and he screamed.
If Josh had taken fright and turned and run away straight away, it might have seen him as prey, chased him and jumped on him and dragged him down.
I think it ran away because I screamed. There wasn't really anything else that I did to it that would make it run away.
The cat had no cubs with it. The cat wasn't cornered. The cat just thought to itself, I got an open escape route here, and it just took off and left Josh, and Josh took off in the other direction. He was just a very lucky young man.
If this big cat is still roaming South Wales, it could attack again.
There's been loads of sightings around here. There's been sightings down the bottom of the village. There's been sightings in that garden behind my house.
It is scary when you think about it. But then you don't know really whether or not it's capable of snatching a little toddler.
There's one animal many of us fear more than any other, the shark. Attacks are rare, but when they do happen, they make it crystal clear why sharks are considered to be the ultimate ocean predators. Each year, millions of people are drawn to Australia's Great Barrier Reef for its snorkelling and diving, despite it being home to some 300 species of shark. For honeymoon couple Derek and Alicia Burrows, their idyllic holiday led to a frightening encounter that was a little too close for comfort.
Weather had been nice, mainly calm weather, with a few breezes and not much stronger winds. And so we'd have a nice, romantic, relaxing time.
And the company gave us an extra day for free to sail around, so we wouldn't actually have been at the spot had we not gotten that free day, which was lovely of them, but it's just funny how things worked out. And that morning, I think we just relaxed on the beach a bit, and I tried a little bit of windsurfing. There wasn't much wind, so it was good for me to try, and my husband did a little bit too.
Then Derek decided to go for a swim.
The boat was moored a few hundred metres from the beach, and I'd swum forwards up towards the anchor. I'd followed the chain down and swimming along the bottom. And I'd come up for air and then gone down again and found the chain and just swimming along. I hadn't quite got to the anchor yet when the shark grabbed me.
It was a reef shark, and both his legs were inside its mouth.
Didn't feel any pain, but I just felt like somebody had grabbed my legs and shaking them around. I was looking around to my side to see what was going on, and at first I thought it was my wife. She'd come for a swim as well and playing tricks on me. But somehow I did realise it was a shark. Just vaguely remember seeing a curvy blue-grey body or something like that.
In the struggle, one of Derek's flippers came off. This momentarily distracted the shark and enabled him to get away.
After he let go, I just went straight up to the surface.
Despite his injuries, he knew he would have to get back to the boat. The shark could bite again.
I was at the back of the yacht, and then I suddenly saw my husband surface and then frantically swim back towards the yacht, and I thought, what's wrong? I could not work it out.
I was maybe only 30 or 50 metres in front of the boat, so it didn't take too long to get back.
And then just before he got on the yacht, he said, shark or shark attack.
Shark! I'm bleeding.
Yeah, it wasn't until then, till I jumped on the back of the boat, that I saw my leg had been cut open and there was blood on the boat and blood pouring out of both my legs.
Alicia helped him on board, but was then faced with the daunting task of treating his injuries. They didn't know when help would arrive.
When Derek got on the back of the yacht, I saw his wounds. He asked me to grab some towels, and then he wrapped his legs in that.
Oh, it's bleeding everywhere.
Then, looking down at my legs, I saw my left leg was hanging open. The muscle was cut, the calf muscle was cut, and my right leg was cut as well. So I was concerned about losing too much blood. I knew I was away from the shark, and being on the boat, I knew we could get help, but I was just hoping I wouldn't lose too much blood before the help came.
The next thing I probably did was go down to the cabin and try and get on the radio to call for help. The thing was, the radio was off, so I had to try and find the right button, and there's 8 buttons, they're all the same. And when you're in shock, you're just pressing them all. It's the radio.
A bit of fumbling around in the panic. She got the emergency channel.
Somehow I managed to get through.
And there's always people, the police and other rescue services, listening on the emergency channels, and they heard straight away.
Derek was in great pain, but all they could do was wait.
So that was a concerning period. I remember hoping I wouldn't die for a start, I guess. I was concerned I wouldn't be able to walk or run with my leg. I'd lose a lot of muscle or something, or that it just wouldn't really work at all.
I was totally shocked because I saw his leg was just a very deep cut and a bit of the meat was hanging out.
So I lay down, lifted my legs up and wrapped the left leg, which was worse, wrapped that up in a towel and tried to hold that tight as a bit of a bandage, and put my hand on the hole on my right leg just to try and stop the blood coming out, and I was just lying back trying to relax.
A doctor from a nearby island was flown out to tend to Derek's wounds. The emergency helicopter evacuated him to the nearby Cairns hospital. There, the extent of the injuries became evident. The shark's teeth had ripped a large chunk out of his leg. The injury needed 100 stitches.
When I got to the hospital, there was a bit of an unknown how the stitches went. Had the shark bitten him just even a few centimetres further in his leg, he might have lost much more blood, or his main nerves might have been cut.
Had he been bitten anywhere else on his body, he might have lost an arm, you know, or died, basically. By the time he came out of the operation, I felt fairly confident he's going to be fine.
Even though sharks can be dangerous, they really don't deserve their fearsome reputation. On average, there's only 60 attacks recorded in a year. Sharks aren't out to get us, and when we go into the ocean, we're entering their home, their environment. Most of the time, they slip away before we even know they're there.
However prepared we think we are, wild animal attacks, more often than not, catch us unawares. The motto of an American group of scouts couldn't have prepared them for an attack by a rogue bear.
Raymond Benz, RJ to his friends, has been a scout member from a very young age. In July 2001, he went to the Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico, a trip that would end with an encounter he'd never forget.
We start hiking up, and it's a really hot day. So we get on top of Hard Peak, eat lunch and everything. We start hiking down, and one of my crew members got altitude sickness. And he vomited into a bag.
Any items with strong odours, known as smellables, must be taken back to base camp.
Well, the procedure is that they don't want you just, if you're getting sick, they don't want you to do it anywhere. They prefer you to carry it out. And he carried what he had back to camp and put it in the sump area where normal smellables would be if they have to stay in the camp.
There's always potential danger in the woods, and it's crucial that safety procedures are followed.
They have an area that you cook. Also, in each camp, they have a cable that you're able to hoist your food up on, in an area that you call the sump that you can pour any smellable waters down. And you shouldn't sleep within that area. Now that's an area that you stay out of. If you do have a visitor, whether it be a raccoon or any other kind of wildlife, they're generally going to stay in that area. It's called the Bermuda Triangle.
Preparations for the night seem to be complete.
We got to bed, I would say it's somewhere around 10 o'clock. We had heard some noise in the campsite. I looked out through the back of the tent with my flashlight, and there was a bear.
About 10 o'clock that night, bear comes through the first time, just kind of makes a nuisance of himself, makes his presence known.
He went over to the sump area. He scurried around that for a little while, checking out the smell. He would come by pretty close to the tents, and we got to sniffing of our gear and things like that, and messing around, and all we could think, oh, he's going to tear up our gear, and we really wasn't thinking about anyone's life being in danger.
We scare him off by yelling at him, banging stuff together.
Go away, bear!
Oh, get out of here!
Get!
The bear, after a little bit of encouragement, left. Typically, a bear is not going to come near people. There's generally something that's going to attract them.
It was the odour of human vomit that had lured the bear to the camp, but it seemed that he'd left for good. So again, the boys settled down for the night.
So I fall back asleep for a few hours. He comes through again, and he eats the bag of vomit that we had by the sump pit, which we were supposed to put up in our bear bag, but we didn't.
That could have been a fatal mistake.
A group of American Boy Scouts had been harassed by a marauding bear twice in one night. He was attracted by the scent of human vomit, but found no food. Still hungry, he came back a third and final time.
It was after midnight. He came back in again, and he went over to the area that we generally cook at, and he started fooling with some of our stove and throwing that around, and then pretty quickly he moved toward RJ and Zach's tent.
The two boys were awoken by noises outside, but initially thought it was their friends trying to scare them. It wasn't.
He patted on our tent, and a couple times me and Zach were like, all right guys, it's not funny, you know.
Hey guys, it's not cold. I'm trying to get some sleep here.
And we heard the rip.
I woke up to a bear dragging me. He bit onto my hand and let go, and then come back at my face.
He bit Zach, and Zach gave the bear good right hook.
He like reared back, punched it in the face, because that's kind of what you're supposed to do.
And I hit it and it pounced on RJ.
The bear was really enraged.
And then he comes around the other side of the tent where I was, curled up into a ball, screaming like a little girl, and rips through, pulls me out by my arm. All the while I was punching him and just yelling, doing everything I can, and all my crew members were trying to beat him off me.
All they could do was try to frighten the bear with anything they could lay their hands on.
Then he chomps into my leg pretty good. Then I'm not sure when he claws my back, but I've got a claw mark back here.
Got back on him again, and he ripped his back pretty good.
And it hopped off. RJ kind of moved a little bit and it jumped back on him and grabbed his head.
After a minute or so, he starts gnawing on my head. That's when it really got intense for me.
This type of attack could have resulted in the victim's neck being snapped.
One quick shake, as you would see a bear do, his neck would have been gone. I didn't think there was anything we was going to be able to do about it, and I just believe it's just by the pure grace of God that he let him go.
Then he finally lets me go for a minute, just long enough to where one of the adult leaders could pull me away. They all form a human line and kind of get between me and the bear. And he's still kind of coming after me with blood dripping from his muzzle.
Despite this prolonged mauling, RJ was still alive, but he still had to get through the rest of the night.
Things that were going through my mind at that point was like, I probably won't make it through the evening.
There's blood everywhere. You'd walk on the ground, you'd get blood on your feet. So I was barefoot, and I picked my foot up and it was red.
With the bear driven out of camp, they now needed help.
Before you ever leave on a trek, you have a plan what you're going to do in case of an emergency, but you just don't think that's ever going to happen to you.
With an angry bear roaming the woods, 3 boys were sent to the next camp to radio for assistance.
Pretty bold, I think, for 3 young men to start out in the night not knowing where a bear was to get help.
I probably would have died if they didn't make the journey, just the 3 miles. But they were football players, they could handle it.
While waiting for help to arrive, the scouts did what they could to ensure the victim's survival. Zach was placed near the fire, whilst RJ was treated inside one of the tents.
Zach was over sitting by the fire. He was bit through the hand pretty seriously, and they wrapped his hand up and just kept him warm. RJ was a little more critical.
You could hear RJ in the tent where they was working on him, hollering.
He had a wound large enough to put your hand in the back of his leg.
I guess a couple hours later, the Philmont Suburban finally got there to take me and Zach to base camp.
Hang on, RJ, we're going to get you out of here. I can still see them coming across. It looked like the cavalry coming because the headlights on their 4-wheel drive vehicles coming out to help us. I think that's probably where my emotions really got their highest, is when I was through. You know, okay, it's over now. We got him into the truck and they left, and then we thought, you know, what now?
The injured boys were taken to a nearby hospital for treatment.
My injuries were basically ones on my arm. I'm missing part of my tricep here. I've got a couple major wounds on my leg, and I've got one that runs right behind here, and back here, one on my left eyelid, and a couple back here, and a couple near my brainstem here. It's all very close to vital parts, and I was fortunate that he didn't get them.
A recent drought had wreaked havoc with the local food chain. Starving and driven to desperation, the bear had attacked a human.
It's unfortunate, but this bear was a menace and was going to be a problem for other campers, so they had to destroy it.
The bear was shot 3 days later at the same campsite, and that's where I actually got this necklace. It's from the bear that attacked me. He weighed about 250 pounds, but he had the body size of about a 300 or 400 pound bear. So he was very, hungry.
The Scouts' actions didn't go unnoticed, and they all won the National Boy Scouts Award for bravery.
I thank the guys every time I see them. I'm just like, man, I'm so glad you guys were there. You really saved me that night.
Unfortunately, bear attacks are a real danger to campers in North America. As humans continue to encroach on their territory, we can expect to see more of these types of encounters.
Wild animals can sometimes attack us, and the consequences can be devastating. It's not their fault. In captivity, they can be frightened or cornered and lash out. In the wilderness, we're encroaching more and more into their territory. We need to learn how to work with animals to avoid these terrifying encounters.
If anything, it was my fault for momentarily taking the slack off the rope.
I don't really blame the bear all that much, because it was acting like a bear does.
He was only playing. No, I mean, he's beautiful. Wasn't his fault.